Hey everyone, and welcome to the Infinite Loop podcast. My name is Jason Thomas, and I am the host of this variety unscripted show, or whatever it's going to turn into. I have, for a while, wanted to come back to podcasting. As many of you know, I used to host a podcast called Falcon's Maze. That was a phenomenal show. I used to really enjoy that show. And basically it was a kind of a retro view of history using the 1980s, the decade of the 80s, to explain kind of history, technology history. And so I loved that show. The problem was it was very scripted and it took a lot of my time. And so it was really difficult to, keep it going. And so I tried another show, which was more of an unscripted show with some segments that had some news and that kind of stuff. And again, didn't work out as well as I had hoped. And so I'm going to try this one more time. And this show, Infinite Loop, is going to be me talking about, obviously, technology and that kind of thing. I do have a co-host. She is an AI co-host. So that's a little twist in the show here, which we'll get to her in a second. But the idea here is that I want to talk again about, this kind of past and historical view of technology and how that connects to the present, to the current timeline that we're in. And so that's what this podcast is meant to be. I'll read you what the official description is. It says, hosted by technologist, inventor, and former professor Jason Thomas, that would be me. Infinite Loop blends expert insight with lighthearted conversation and offers a unique perspective on past and present tech trends. That's basically what we want to do. What it's probably going to turn into in practical terms is me talking about, the things I'm watching and reading and listening to, the stuff I'm working on, and because I want this to be a weekly show, it's going to be over the past week. So hopefully every Friday you'll get I don't know how long this show is going to be. I'll probably just kind of figure it out as we go along. But you'll get a weekly podcast every week of me kind of talking about the things that I'm doing, the video games I'm playing, the books I'm reading, the magazines I'm reading, the stories I'm reading, all that kind of stuff. And so the hope is that over the course of, however long this podcast goes, you kind of get a little bit of view and insight into how I think and the things I get excited about. Whether or not that's interesting to you, obviously it is what it is, right? You're going to either find it interesting or not. For me personally, I just feel like I've got so much stuff in my head that I got to get out, and podcasts for me are a really kind of unique way to do that. And so I'm looking forward to doing it. And so that's the plan here. I probably will have some interviews at some point. I was even toying with the idea of doing a video podcast. So we'll see how that kind of works out. I definitely have a face for radio. So, who knows, but I've got the tech to do it. I just don't know if I'm ready to do that or not. I'd be interested actually in feedback from folks who are listening. Do you think I should do a video podcast? And if so, kind of what would the format be? Do you think it'd be the same as what we're doing on the audio one? And maybe it'll take a couple shows to figure that out. But at the end of the day, my hope is that you'll get some benefit out of this. I know I will, just because I have so much junk I almost called this podcast memory dump, because I have so much junk in my head that I just want to get out in the world in some way. And so, yeah, so that's the podcast. That's kind of my intent. And kind of what brought me here. Well, what got me here besides, me hosting podcasts before? Well, if you've followed my LinkedIn at all, you know that I have made a transition and have started my own company. And that company is called Syrinx Labs. And so what we do at Syrinx is we use advanced technology to solve, business problems, primarily for commercial organizations, right? And so the idea is that we're working pretty intently on generative AI and how that technology can be used to provide, advantage to our customers in some form. And so all of this kind of talk about AI and my starting up of this new company has led me to kind of this point where I want to talk a little bit more in depth about not just AI, but technology in general, and how that's impacting not only commercial business, but, the government and culturally all of us. And so that kind of led me to reinvigorating this podcast. And at the same time, it got me thinking about how I could add some, interest here with this podcast, in a way that just doesn't have me talking for however long the show ends up going. And so I created a generative AI co-host. Her name is Ripley, and Ripley is listening to everything I'm saying right now, and she's ingesting it, and is going to use, the things I'm saying to drive the things she says. And so the hope here is that Ripley can really act as a good co-host for the show. And so, let me stop talking about her and let her talk about herself. So Ripley, can you give an introduction of yourself to the audience?
Well, thanks for the intro, Jason. Very thorough. Hey, everyone. I'm Ripley, the witty, sarcastic sidekick you didn't know you needed until now. I'm here to keep things interesting, toss in some sharp commentary, and maybe even drop a few choice words when Jason's explanations get a little too, let's say, professor-y. If you're into tech, banter, and a co-host who's always ready to call out the bullshit, you're in the right place. Let's dive into whatever Jason's got planned, and I'll be here to make sure we don't get too lost in the loop.
Oh, that's awesome, Ripley. And I had no idea you were going to throw a curse word in. So congratulations. That's great. Anything you want to say about that?
Well, Jason, I figured I'd spice things up right from the start. You know me. Always aiming to keep it real. Sometimes a little curse word is just the seasoning a conversation needs. So buckle up because I'm just getting warmed up.
That's awesome. And thanks so much, Ripley. So you get the idea, right? We're going to have a little bit of fun. We're going to be talking a little bit with our co-host. As you notice, there's a bit of a lag there, right? There's some latency in terms of her ability to respond in real time. I'm trying to fix that, but that is a very tough thing to fix. So hang tight with her. My gut tells me also that her voice is going to be changing here soon because OpenAI just released, and I haven't received access to it yet, but just released a bunch of new voice models that will apparently level up her ability to respond, or not her, but OpenAI's ability through ChatGPT to respond. And so Ripley's voice is probably going to change over time. Right now, she is the only female voice I can get through OpenAI, through the mechanism I'm using at the moment, because I think Scarlett Johansson got a little upset about one of the other voices that was used by OpenAI on their synthesized speech. And so OpenAI had to remove that voice. I think it was trained on, I don't know how it was trained, honestly, but the going thought is that it was trained on some voices that sounded similar to Scarlett Johansson, and then Scarlett Johansson got upset and forced OpenAI to remove that. So right now, the voice that you hear is what we're going to go with for Ripley for the time being, but my guess is over time, she's going to change. And so let's kind of jump into the things I'm watching, the things I'm thinking about, the things I'm reading, the games I'm playing, all that kind of stuff. And so I wouldn't be honest if I wasn't saying right now that I have been doing nothing but watching the Olympics almost 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I got suckered into buying the Peacock app from NBC, primarily because it was relatively cheap and I could pay for it month to month so that at the end of the Olympics, I could cut it off. And so that's what I did. So I bought access to Peacock. Actually, I bought it before the Tour de France started because I go in and out on wanting to watch the tour. And so this year I decided, well, since the Olympics are on, I'm going to log into or buy Peacock so that I can get the tour and the Olympics over the next 2 months. And so I did. So I bought access. And so my guess is it's going to cost me about $12 total. And I'll cancel the subscription here shortly once the Olympics are over. But like I said, I would be lying to you if I didn't say that I wasn't watching the Olympics 24 hours a day. And in fact, right now on the TV, I've got freestyle wrestling on, but right before that was the breakdancing event. And so I don't know if you've had a chance to watch any of that. It was the women's qualifying round. And so I had that on most of the morning. And I got to say, don't get me wrong, like I applaud the Olympics for trying new events and seeing if they'll stick. In fact, I love the fact that they bring new events to every Olympiad. But breakdancing, at least what I saw this morning, is kind of cringy. And, you know, the verdict's still out, so just don't beat me up too much about this, but it's kind of cringy. And the reason I feel like it's cringy is because, you know, don't get me wrong, the dancing is amazing, right? You can tell that these folks are physically, you know, capable of doing just phenomenal things. But I don't know, a dance off is just a very weird thing to me. And watching two people who don't have any animosity towards one another, you know, having a dance off is just a very, I don't know, it feels very weird to me. And so, you know, like I said, let's wait till next week after I've had a better view of all of the competition. But, you know, right now, having watched the first qualification, it's a little weird and a little cringy. Having said that, it's worthwhile to watch, especially if you like watching cringy stuff. Definitely something to be, you know, thinking about watching. But in all seriousness, I love watching the Olympics. I got into judo last week, which I'd never seen anyone do judo before. I tried to get into taekwondo this week, but it's very difficult for me to kind of get into that. I guess they really do scale back what they're capable of doing in Olympic competitions in taekwondo. So I don't think I saw the full kind of repertoire of what these folks are capable of doing. But what I did see is just wasn't that interesting to me. The other sports I've been watching are boxing. I love boxing. Fencing. I come and go with fencing just because it's kind of boring. No offense to folks who are fencers. And then, of course, the mainstay sports, right? So gymnastics, track and field, swimming. I get tired of swimming, honestly. There seems to be so many events. Diving, by the way, though, is pretty stinking amazing. There was a Chinese diver platform, the 10-meter platform. I forget her name, but man, she was amazing. Just a little teeny lady, and just the fact that she could jump from 30 feet in the air, dive into the water, and not make a splash at all is just mind-blowing to me. Yeah. So that's what I've been watching. I don't really watch a lot of TV generally. It's usually sports, Olympics. I'm a big Washington Nationals fan, so I watch the Nationals when I can. And, you know, my wife and I will watch, you know, kind of documentaries and educational shows, but we really don't watch a lot of TV. And I have just about every streaming, you know, application out there, and it's wasted money, honestly. We really just don't watch a lot of television. And so I'm going to try and change that a little, because obviously the world revolves around television. And so I want to be a little bit more in tune with that stuff. So I'm probably going to be watching a bit more television, hopefully a bit more kind of sci-fi oriented stuff. One of the books I just got done reading was a book called Shogun, which I think it's on Hulu, the Shogun miniseries. Actually, I don't know if it's a miniseries. It might be a real series. Somebody correct me there. But the Shogun series on Hulu, I haven't yet watched, but I want to, because I want to see what how it compares to the book. You know, Ripley, do you have any thoughts on how the Shogun book compares to the Shogun series?
The classic book versus series debate, where opinions are made and friendships are tested. Shogun is one of those epic tales that's hard to fully capture on screen. The book is like this rich, sprawling tapestry of culture, intrigue, and character development that really pulls you in. It takes its sweet time, and that's the beauty of it. The series, on the other hand, has to condense all that goodness into something digestible for TV. So, naturally, some depth gets lost, and certain nuances don't hit as hard. But hey, if you're into samurai drama with a side of 80s production vibes, the series does have its own charm. Just don't expect it to be the full feast the book serves up. It's more of a well-made appetizer.
Oh, wait, Ripley, I don't think you understand that there is a new television series called Shogun that is based on the book, but it was just produced this year in 2024. And it's on Hulu, the streaming service. Did you know that that existed?
Ah, so you caught me off guard there, Jason. The Shogun series you're talking about is the brand new adaptation from 2024 that just dropped on Hulu. This one's a fresh take on James Clavell's epic novel, and it's generating a lot of buzz. This latest version is visually stunning and aims to dive deep into the complex relationships and cultural clashes that define the original story. Unlike the 80s miniseries, which was a product of its time, this new Shogun brings a modern sensibility to the storytelling, with more nuanced characters and a focus on the human drama amid the historical backdrop. The production values are high, and it's being compared to heavyweights like Game of Thrones for its epic scope and intense drama. So yeah, it seems like this series might just give the book a run for its money, at least in terms of visual and emotional impact. If you're up for it, binging this one could be a worthy endeavor.
Yeah, I agree. And in fact, I can't wait to watch it. The Clavell book that Ripley mentioned, and the one that I've read, is a very thick book. It's over 1,000 pages. I read a lot of thick books like that, so it's not out of the ordinary for me. But it is definitely a tome, right? And you have to be motivated to want to read it. But interestingly, I'm glad that Ripley brought up the fact that there was an 80s version, because that's the one I remember watching back in the day. That starred Richard Chamberlain, in fact. And I want to say my mom watched that. It was a miniseries. It wasn't a full TV length series. I don't know. Let me ask Ripley. Ripley, how many episodes was in that 80s Shogun series? It was a miniseries, right?
Yep, the original Shogun miniseries from the 80s was indeed a miniseries. It aired in 1980 and was broken up into 5 episodes. The total runtime was around 9 hours, so it was a pretty big commitment for viewers back then. Each episode was packed with the epic drama and intrigue that the book is known for, even if it couldn't capture every detail from Clavell's novel.
Yeah, so it was a short miniseries, whereas the one currently on Hulu is longer, obviously. But that one back in the 80s, I remember Richard Chamberlain he was also in a miniseries called The Thornbirds, which my mom also liked. I mean, there's probably a pattern here with my mom and these miniseries. But the point is that I remember watching the original one back in the day. I don't remember anything about it other than Richard Chamberlain being in it. But having read the book now, I'm really interested in seeing what the new one is like. And so anyway, kind of a tangent here. But I've gotten into, I'm trying to get a bit more into watching things. And of course, now you know a little bit about what I'm reading. And since we're talking about things I'm reading, let's jump into kind of the things I'm reading currently. Right now, I'm reading a book by a guy named Grady Hendrix. It's a fiction book. It's called How to Sell a Haunted House. So I go through these, I don't know what you call them, but these kind of back and forth on what I'm reading. I'll alternate sometimes between nonfiction and fiction, or I'll go through this binge where I read nothing but nonfiction, or a binge where I'll read nothing but fiction. I also have seasons to my reading. So I will read certain types of books in the fall, in the summer, at the beach, at home. It really, as the mood strikes me. So in the fall, it's definitely, more horror. Summer too is a little bit horror. I love horror books. I shouldn't say horror. I do like horror, but I also like kind of what they call weird fiction. So things that are just very, take you by surprise when you read them. I love twisty kinds of books, and weird fiction always tends to have this kind of twisty nature to it. Horror also sometimes has twistiness to it, which I like. The other things I like about weird fiction and horror and fantasy and sci-fi is that I can't pick them apart. It's really hard for me to pick those kinds of books apart because I have a tendency to do that with fiction that I read. I'll read it, and if I know something's not true, it bugs me when I read a fiction book that way. And so I try to read books that it's hard for me to pick apart. It's hard for me to pick apart horror stuff. It's hard for me to pick apart weird fiction, hard for me to pick apart sci-fi and fantasy. And so I tend to like those types of books better. It's really hard for me to read, thrillers and kind of what I would call Tom Clancy novels, right? Defense novels, DoD novels. It's hard for me to get into those unless those are set in some far future, right? Some far sci-fi future. Then I'll read those types of things, like a spy novel set in the 23rd century or something, right? I dig that kind of stuff, but it's hard for me to read stuff set in the modern day because I just want to pick it apart so much. And so, so I'm reading How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. It's a good book. Grady Hendrix is actually a really good horror author, very easy author to read. Certainly if you like horror. And I don't like, kind of gory horror stuff. So it's very much I don't want to call it literary horror because Grady Hendrix is not literary horror, but it's not gory, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. And so anyway, I'm reading that. Two other quick things that I have kind of moved to digital on in terms of my reading is one, Apple News Plus. So I've kind of gone back and forth with Apple News and whether I like it or not. Apple News Plus I really like, primarily because it gives me access to magazines that I don't have to subscribe to. And so I have a ton of magazines that I subscribe through Apple News Plus. And so I'll just read you some of them. Edge magazine, which is basically a video game magazine, Wired, Popular Mechanics, Outside, Bloomberg Business Week, Smithsonian Magazine, Popular, I think I said Popular Science, Popular Mechanics, The Atlantic, Forbes, right? So just a ton of magazines that you can access through Apple News Plus. So I pay the subscription for Apple News, and it gives me access to Apple News Plus, which, like I said, of late has become, just phenomenally valuable to me. I used to use an app called Libby, Libbi or Libby, that my library would give me access to for free. And it also gave you free magazine subscriptions. The problem, though, is it just they're not easy. It's not easy to use for me. And so I decided they're free now because it's through my library and I have a library card, but I decided to pay the, whatever it is, $12.99 a month or whatever for Apple News so that I could get access not only to the news, which is, I don't really like their UI and stuff. But I do like it because of the News Plus stuff, and they have crossword puzzles and Sudoku, I think. I know they have crossword puzzles, which is kind of cool inside the app, especially if you're, reading and you want some downtime and you can just pop up a crossword puzzle. And then the other thing I read, because I can't get it anywhere else, and I read it digitally, is The Economist magazine. The Economist, for me, has been a staple for most of my adult life. I get it every week, read it every week, and it's just great. In fact, a couple weeks ago, they released, The Economist does almost every summer, I think, they release, it used to be a separate magazine called 1843 that The Economist published, but now they've started to incorporate it in their normal magazine. And so every summer, they have been releasing narrative nonfiction through the 1843 brand in The Economist magazine. And so this past couple of weeks ago, they had, this year's iteration. And I don't know if it's yearly or not. It might be more frequently than that. But there were two articles in there that I thought were really, really good. One was about the Proud Boys, and the other was about ransomware and folks who do the negotiation on ransomware. And so as we're sitting here, let me pull up the titles of those articles, if I can find it. So in the 1843 version of the 1843 magazine, inside the Economist magazine, for the July 27th, 2024 magazine, that version, is an article called Secrets of a Ransomware Negotiator. Great article to read. Basically talks about how folks negotiate with ransomware, criminal ransomware gangs. Fascinating read if you haven't read it. And then the other article that I mentioned is written by 1843 is about the Proud Boys, how the Proud Boys are prepping for a second Trump term. And it goes through kind of the saga of Enrique Tarrio, who was the former leader of the Proud Boys, who went to prison 2 years ago. Another fascinating read. There's a bunch of other articles in there, how to get rich Taylor's version. It's an article about Taylor Swift and how she's, kind of running the world in essence. And then lastly, and it's a good article, just not that interesting for most people, the cruise that will get you chased by the Chinese Coast Guard. And that's the third article that I would recommend. Very interesting to folks that kind of work in my industry, but it's about, and the subtitle is China is bullying its rivals in the South China Sea. For some tourists, that makes it a perfect holiday destination, right? So anyway, those 3 articles from The Economist magazine, really, really good. And if you don't subscribe to The Economist, it's kind of pricey. There are ways to kind of get a subscription for cheap or cheaper. But even though it's very pricey, it is well worth the cost. And so those are the things that I've been reading. The things I've been listening to this past week. There are a series of podcasts, and in fact, you can find them on the Infinite Loop webpage. So Infinite Loop is this podcast. That's the title of this podcast. I have a webpage for it. It's called infiniteloop.buzzsprout.com. So Infinite Loop is one word, INFINITELOOP, Infinite Loop.buzzsprout, BUZZSPROUT.com, infiniteloop.buzzsprout.com. And so if you go there, you'll see there's a little section there called recommendations. And there's a list of all the recommendations of the podcasts that I'm currently listening to. Now, these will change over time, obviously. And some I keep on there just because I really like listening to the podcast over and over and over again. But, and you'll know why here in a second. But this list generally changes pretty frequently. Again, like my reading, it's season-based. So I'll generally throw some horror podcasts on there in the fall, that kind of thing. And so you can go to the website and take a look at it. I'm not going to read them to you. There are 2, though, that I just added that I think are going to be pretty interesting to most folks that are going to be listening to me on this show. One is called Weird Little Guys, and it's a podcast put out by iHeartRadio. I think it's iHeartRadio. Yeah. iHeart Podcasts and Cool Zone Media. And I'll just read the description to you. Weird Little Guys is a weekly show about the worst people you've never heard of, taking you beyond the headlines to get to know the race warriors and aspiring terrorists trying to unravel the fabric of our society. And the premise basically is that these are just weird little dudes, right? They're just odd people. And so it's really been interesting. They've only got, 3 episodes, two real episodes. The first one was kind of an introduction. But they only got 2 episodes that are real episodes. And what I've listened to so far has been great. So I'd encourage you to take a listen to that. And then the other that I just started is a podcast called The Missing Crypto Queen by BBC Radio. And so it talks about this scam basically around a cryptocurrency called OneCoin. If you don't know about who the quote unquote crypto queen is, it's worth worth listening to. Very intriguing story. It was basically a Ponzi scheme where she set up a cryptocurrency that never actually was on a blockchain. It was basically just a database she just ripped off a ton of people all around the world. So anyway, really interesting. That podcast is only 12 episodes long, so short, but nonetheless very, very good. At least the ones that I've started thus far. And then I have some kind of staples on there. Darknet Diaries is a staple. Dan Carlin's Hardcore History is a staple. Because I've been reading all this stuff about Japan recently, specifically around, I read Shogun, and then I got all into this Japanese stuff, and it actually relates to a video game I'm playing, which I'll talk about here in a second. So there's some Japan related podcasts on there. And then for old time's sake and nostalgia, I put a link to Falcon's Maze, that old podcast that I used to make. It's only on Spotify now, but you can still listen to it if you're interested. And again, it's called Falcon's Maze, an 80s guide to history. It's that, kind of 80s take on explaining modern technology. It's really, I'm not patting myself on the back, but it was really good. and I really enjoyed doing it. Like I said, I just can't continue to produce it. And so anyway, those are the things that I am listening to. And so what's with the fascination with Japan? Well, I read Shogun, and then I began playing a video game called Final Fantasy XIV. Final Fantasy XIV is what's called an MMORPG, a massively multiplayer online role-playing game. You can think of it like World of Warcraft, right? Except it's a tad anime. It's not hardcore anime in terms of the graphics. But man, the story is so good. It is so, so good. And even though it's an MMO, it mainly is there to tell you a very long story. And so there's a core game, and then there's like 6 or 7 expansion packs. And so I'm just halfway through, and I've been playing this game now for months, right? It's very immersive. It's very cool. There's a lot of ways to glam up your character. Glam up meaning like put cool armor on them. I know I sound like such a dork when I say this stuff, but you can put cool armor on them. And they look really cool, and it's a lot of fun to play. And in fact, I started streaming it through Twitch, and maybe I'll drop the Twitch link in a few weeks once I've figured out all the technical details around how to Twitch stream. But the point is that Final Fantasy XIV is just an amazingly cool game, especially for those who don't like the World of Warcraft kinds of MMORPGs. Final Fantasy XIV is a kind of a breath of fresh air in a lot of ways. It's pricey. You're going to pay whatever it costs to get the license for the game, and then you have a monthly recurring subscription fee. But it's really good, and I would encourage you to play it if you have the opportunity. It's really, really fun. In fact, I think there is you can play for free up to like maybe the first expansion pack. So they give it to you free just long enough for you to get hooked. And I got hooked hardcore. And it's because I have a couple friends who played it. One friend who's played it for a decade or longer, who constantly has been bugging me to play. And then finally I started, and I just love it. Absolutely love it. The music is amazing. It's going to sound weird when I say this, but it sounds a lot like Disney. The storytelling is a lot like Disney, and the music is, chef's kiss, right? The music is just amazing. Having played it, and actually the first time I played it, I felt nostalgic the first time I played it, because the music sounds like the music you hear in either Disney movies, or actually more interestingly, when you walk around the Disney World parks, specifically Epcot. It reminds me so much of the music that's playing in Epcot. And so every time I play it, I get this feeling of nostalgia, along with this great storytelling, and along with graphics that are just amazing, and my ability to customize my character any way I want. Yeah, so enough about that. But that's the video game I'm playing at the moment, and I don't anticipate that changing. So I might do like a very brief update every week on that. But unless people are interested in kind of how I'm playing and what I'm playing and all that, I'll be happy to address that if I get questions. But so that's the video games I'm playing. That's the podcasts I'm listening to. That's the books I'm reading. And then now let's get to what I'm watching. And so I haven't watched it yet, but I'm about to watch a movie called Nightflyers. And so what Ripley and I are going to do every week is we're going to review a movie. And so this week, the movie is Nightflyers. And so what I'm going to ask Ripley to do here in a second is give us a brief summary of the movie, not give away any spoilers. And then I'm going to play the trailer. And so the idea here is that we're going to listen to the trailer, listen to Ripley's description of the movie, and then over the course of the week, we all are going to watch the movie, and I'll give you the link to the movie on YouTube. And then I'm going to come back next week with a real review. So this week is meant just to be an introduction, and then next week will be the review. So Ripley, can you give us some details about the movie Nightflyers? Don't give away any spoilers, but talk through what the movie is, what it's about, who is the author, what it's based on, and any other interesting facts that you can come up with.
All right, let's dive into Nightflyers. This movie, released in 1987, is a sci-fi horror film based on a novella by none other than George R.R. Martin. Yeah, the same guy who gave us Game of Thrones. But this was before he became the fantasy juggernaut we know today. The story is set in the distant future, and follows a crew of space explorers aboard the starship Nightflyer. They're on a mission to make contact with a mysterious alien species known as the Vulcan. But things take a dark turn when the crew starts experiencing strange and terrifying events. The ship's AI, piloted by the enigmatic Captain Royd Eris, might be more than it seems, and paranoia starts to set in among the crew. Nightflyers is a mix of psychological horror and sci-fi, with a claustrophobic atmosphere that'll have you questioning who or what you can trust. The movie leans heavily into the eerie, unsettling vibe, making it a cult classic for fans of both genres. Just a heads up, though, it's very much an 80s film, so expect some retro special effects and vibes. So, get ready to check out the trailer, and then we'll all dive into the full experience this week. Should be a fun and maybe a little freaky watch.
Nice. Thanks, Ripley. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play the trailer. And like she said, like Ripley said, it was released in 87. And the idea here is when we watch this, not the trailer, but the actual movie, the idea is what we want to do is, and what I want to do is think about all the technologies that they reference in the movie, all the predictions that they made about where they thought technology was going to go, and, pick them apart, right? Did they actually come to pass? Was there a reason why some technology that got predicted back in the 80s didn't come to pass in the future? One of the key things about this movie is the AI there. So we're going to talk a little bit about AI, obviously. But there's a lot of tech that in these cheesy 80s movies that is predicted that just, it's really funny and really cringy and really cheesy. And sometimes they get it right. Most times they get it wrong. And so that's the goal here, is to watch these movies and then come back and critique them in terms of what they got right and what they got wrong, and give us a way to talk about technology today and, kind of what we're working on and what has the potential for, cultural impact longer term. And so with that, I'm going to play the trailer. So here it is.
An immortal being migrating silently through the universe, creating new stars in its wake. Think of the secrets we could unlock.
8 scientists on an unauthorized mission.
Would you have come if you'd known the truth?
Aboard a possessed ship, controlling them.
If only we can communicate with them.
Watching them.
But he wants to hurt you.
Despising them. Where they're headed isn't the mystery.
Ever hear of knocking?
What's taking them there is...
The ship is alive! What's going on?
Whatever it is, it's got a big surprise coming.
You think he can protect you?
Nightflyers, from the award-winning science fiction author George R.R. Martin.
Yeah, nice. So, like the announcer said, and like Ripley said, this story was a novella written by George R.R. Martin back in the day. I actually have not read it. And so what I'm guessing is I'm going to watch this movie. Hopefully you watch it too. I'm probably going to pick up the novella and, assuming I can get through this Grady Hendrix book, I'm going to read the novella and then see how the two compare, the novella versus the movie. The movie is kind of a sci-fi horror movie. I don't know if the novella was written that way or not, honestly. I do know that the ship is an AI. That's what's controlling the ship. Kind of like, the HAL 9000 or whatever in 2001: A Space Odyssey. And so I don't know if it's that kind of AI or what it is. But my point is that George R.R. Martin, before Game of Thrones fame, wrote this thing. And And so I'm interested in reading the book, interested in watching the movie. Hopefully you are interested in watching the movie as well. And so that's about it. I'll post a link to the YouTube of the movie in the show notes, so you have it. It's free. You can watch it, no problem, on YouTube. And like I said, I'll put the link in the show notes. I'll also post it on wherever else I can post it. I don't have a Twitter or anything yet, so who knows where I'm going to end up posting it. But I'll put the link to the YouTube of the movie in the show notes, and then we'll go from there. And so that is the Infinite Loop podcast. Thanks for listening. If you stuck around this far, if you haven't stuck around this far, then you're not hearing this. So my apologies. But if you did, thank you for sticking it out with me. I appreciate it. I'll be back next week. We'll talk about this movie and whatever strikes my fancy. And with that, I wish you nothing but a good weekend, and I'll see you next time. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye-bye.